We join you right now with breaking news from the Middle East. Israel has launched preemptive airstrikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran, going after a variety of positions inside the country.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Carissa Lawson. Breaking news from the Middle East. Israel has launched what it's calling a preemptive strike against Iran. We understand this is a joint U.S. and Israeli strike, which hit in Iran's capital of Tehran, near the offices of Iran's supreme leader, where we could see a cloud of smoke rising from the area.
Over the past 48 hours, the Middle East crisis has entered its most intense phase in decades, as the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign against Iran that has reshaped global geopolitics and sent shockwaves through nations around the world. The confrontation began with a massive offensive on Iran's military and strategic sites. In the early hours, U.S. and Israeli forces unleashed a series of airstrikes, ballistic missile attacks, and cruise missile barrages across key Iranian cities and defense infrastructure. These strikes targeted ballistic missile installations, command centers, radar sites, and other facilities linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and defense apparatus. The most dramatic and consequential aspect of these attacks was the confirmed death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, a figure who had led the Islamic Republic since 1989 and whose authority shaped decades of hostile relations with both Washington and Jerusalem. The United States and Israel have publicly stated that their intelligence pinpointed his location as part of the operation, and Iran has acknowledged his death, declaring a period of national mourning. U.S. President Donald Trump framed the strikes as necessary to eliminate what he described as an ongoing threat from Tehran and to degrade Iran's ability to project power through nuclear development, ballistic missiles, and regional proxy networks. He asserted that the operation was aimed at forcing a strategic shift within Iran and weakening its capacity to sponsor militant groups across the Middle East. The Iranian response has been swift and forceful. Tehran launched an extensive barrage of missile and drone strikes against U.S. and Israeli military positions across the region, including bases in Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. These retaliation strikes have already resulted in confirmed casualties among American service members and Israeli civilians, underscoring the very real human cost of this escalating conflict. The rising tensions have not only drawn military responses, but also stirred global political reaction. At an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, diplomats from around the world condemned the attacks and called for de-escalation, while others defended the actions of the U.S. and Israel as lawful defensive measures. Leaders from Europe, Russia, China, and Middle Eastern states have urged restraint, warning that continued escalation could drag the region into a broader war. Meanwhile, the conflict's impact is already rippling into civilian life far beyond the battlefield. The suspension of flights from major Gulf hubs like Abu Dhabi reflects how regional airspace closures are disrupting global travel and trade, signaling that economic and logistical effects are spreading well outside combat zones. Back in the United States, the strikes have sparked protests and stark political debate.
And protests are shaking up across the country in response to the military strikes in Iran. One that started in Times Square saw a massive turnout.
Yeah, let's head out now to Andrew Ramos. He's live in Columbus Circle, where that protest wrapped up a short time ago. Andrew, what was the scene like there?
Well, Ellen and Jessica, at its peak, it ballooned, this protest. About nearly 1,000 protesters, demonstrators, really from all walks of life, mobilizing in response to the military action that took place this morning. And many of them said that it was unwarranted, but also the last thing the United States should be getting involved in.
Demonstrations both supporting and opposing the U.S.-Israel offensive have taken place in major cities, revealing how deeply divided public opinion is on military involvement in the Middle East. Some Americans see the strikes as a necessary defense against aggression and nuclear proliferation. Others fear that the U.S. has entered a war with unpredictable consequences. For Iran, the loss of its supreme leader has created a power vacuum and intense internal uncertainty. The regime has vowed revenge and promised to continue resistance against what it calls Western aggression. Tehran's allies and proxy groups in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen have also voiced support, raising fears of a wider conflagration across the region. Despite this, there are signs of diplomatic pressure and cautious dialogue. President Trump has signaled a conditional.
But it's because of warriors who are willing to lay down their lives to do battle with our enemies. And they do battle better than anybody. An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be a dire threat to every American. We cannot allow a nation that raises terrorist armies to possess such weapons, would allow them to extort the world to their evil will. Not going to let it happen. We're not happening to us, and we're not going to let it happen to others.
If certain strategic objectives, particularly around nuclear restrictions, can be met, however, there is no clear roadmap to peace, and the military operations continue without an immediate ceasefire in sight. Across the region, governments are bracing for instability, oil markets have tightened, global travel routes are rerouted, and nations in the Gulf are urging restraint to avoid further escalation. The conflict has strained international alliances and tested the limits of modern diplomacy in addressing complex security threats. As this situation unfolds, the world is watching a pivotal moment in history, one that may redefine power balances in the Middle East and shape relations between major global players for years to come. If the first phase was shock and military escalation, the second phase is about consequences, and those consequences are global. Right now, the biggest question is not who struck first, it's how far this goes. When the United States and Israel escalate against Iran, the conflict never stays between just three countries. Iran does not fight alone, it operates through a network of regional allies and proxy groups across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. That means the battlefield can expand rapidly without a formal declaration of war. Military analysts are now watching three major flashpoints. First, the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 20% of the world's oil passes through that narrow waterway. If Iran attempts to block or disrupt shipping there, oil prices could spike overnight, triggering economic shockwaves from Europe to Asia. Second, US military bases in the Middle East. Iran has the capability to target American installations using missiles and drones. Even limited strikes could drag Washington into a prolonged conflict. Third, Israel's northern border. If Hezbollah becomes fully engaged, Israel could face a multi-front war, forcing a much larger regional confrontation. Financial markets have already reacted. Oil prices are volatile, defense stocks are rising, airlines are rerouting flights across Middle Eastern airspace, insurance premiums for shipping vessels are increasing. The economic cost of tension alone is enormous, even before a full-scale war. Inside Iran, the situation is equally unstable. Power struggles could emerge between hardline factions and more pragmatic political figures. In moments like this, leadership transitions or internal instability can change the direction of an entire region. In the United States, political debate is intensifying. Supporters argue that strong military action deters long-term threats. Critics warn that escalation without a clear exit strategy risks repeating the mistakes of past Middle East conflicts. And then there is the nuclear question. Any confrontation between Israel, the US, and Iran inevitably raises concerns about nuclear capability and strategic deterrence. Even if no nuclear weapons are involved, the shadow of that possibility shapes every decision being made behind closed doors. So how does this end? There are only three realistic scenarios: limited escalation followed by back-channel diplomacy, regional war involving multiple proxy forces, prolonged standoff with economic and cyber warfare replacing direct military strikes. History shows that wars often begin with confidence and end with compromise. The key factor now is whether diplomatic channels remain open while military pressure rises. What makes this moment dangerous is not just firepower, it's miscalculation. One misread signal, one overreaction, one unintended strike. The world is not just watching missiles, it is watching decision-making under pressure. Because if this expands, it will not only reshape the Middle East, it will reshape global alliances, energy markets, military strategy, and political leadership across continents. This story is still unfolding, and the next 72 hours could determine whether this becomes a contained confrontation or the beginning of something far larger. If you want continued updates and deeper breakdowns as this develops, stay connected. These are not just headlines, they are turning points. Stay informed, stay analytical, and watch what happens next.